I am honored to introduce Vanessa Chan to all of you. Vanessa's short stories have been published in Electric Literature, The Kenyan Review, Ecotone, among other publications. She has also written for magazines such as Vogue and Esquire. She was the 2021 Stanley Elkin Scholar at the Sewanee Writers Conference and has also received scholar awards to attend the Bread Loaf and Tin House Writers Conferences. Her short story collection, The Ugliest Babes in the World, is forthcoming from Mary Sue Rucci Books. Tonight, she will be talking about her debut novel, The Storm We Made. Told mainly through the Alcantara family and spanning years, The Storm We Made is a tale about unlikely spies, secret love affairs, colonial history, and family secrets. In their review of the book, the New York Times Book Review writes that the book's greatest power, it makes space for complexity without relinquishing the grip of a good story. Chan reveals how war is experienced in bodies and hearts, breaking down the morale of those who remain. This is a novel concerned with power, how it's given and taken, whom we must align with to get close to it, and the consuming desire for more. Vanessa will be in conversation with Shannon Sanders. Shannon is the author of the Link Short Story Collection Company, which is also available for purchase here at Politics and Prose. Her short fiction was the recipient of the 2020 Penn Robert J. Dow Short Story Prize for Emerging Writers and has appeared in several publications including One Story, Tri-Quarterly, Joyland, Electric Literature, and elsewhere. Everyone, let us all welcome Vanessa Chan and Shannon Sanders.
There's always this awkward, you put your stuff down, you got to inch yourself into the chair and try to look good. So hi, everyone.
Hi, Vanessa.
Hi.
You're doing great so far.
Amazing. Thank you all for being here.
And I am so excited to talk to you today about this book. I finished the book today. It is a triumph, and I am really excited for everyone who's not picked it up yet to do so and get to read it. And just so excited to be in conversation with you about it.
Thank you. And thank you all for being here. It's okay, on my way here, I think it's a very cold day. So I was in my puffy jacket. I had a scarf, gloves. And y'all in DC are tough as shit. People are walking around in hoodies with shorts. What is wrong with you? It's going to snow tomorrow. Anyway, it's cold. There are many places you could be. But you're here, and I'm really happy that you're here. And I hope my goal for tonight is that you won't notice that the hour has passed. We're just going to hang out. I'm going to tell you some shit, and we're just going to have some fun.
I think that sounds like a plan. And I would love to ask you to start us off by reading from the book.
Yeah, I'm gonna read a section that requires me to do British accents. So forgive me if any of you are English or have English relatives, because I'm going to butcher it, but you'll see why. It's a good section. Also, something I always say up top. Some of you know, I see some familiar faces. Some of you know, a lot of you don't, that I wrote this book in 2020. And at the beginning of me writing this book, my mom passed in April 2020. In 4 days, she would be 64. So I've been dedicating all of my events kind of to her because she really loved her birthday. She loved attention. It's probably where I get it from. So this is for my mom. Thank you for joining me. So what you need to know about this section is that the main character, Cecily, is having a burgeoning friendship with this woman named Lena. And she goes over to her house, and there she encounters three British women. Cecily and Lena are the wives of sort of local administrators in Malaya. So they have some status, but they're still lower status than the British women who are wives of British administrators who are the colonizers of Malaya at the time. Cecily felt the beginnings of a clammy sweat on Lena's palms, a fissure in the other woman's perfectly coiffed image. It surprised her. After all, Lena didn't need her. She'd reascended to the top of the social ladder on her own with her easy charm. Cecily had meant her pie to be a way for her to reach out to Fuijwara, let him know she wanted back in. She had intended nothing more, certainly not this twitch of vulnerability in Lena's face, this naked hopefulness. "Come now, Lena," Cecily said. "We can't leave those three alone with the teacups. Who knows what mayhem they'll cause?" Lena sighed happily and swung her arm into Cecily's, and they walked back out to the front room where the three white women were tittering, teacups abandoned, faces pressed close together. "What are we gossiping about?" Lena trilled, flopping down into the armchair. "Nothing at all," said Lady Lewisham, but from the way the corner of her mouth twitched, Cecily knew she desperately wanted to be asked again. "Now, ladies, out with it," Cecily said. "Well," said the sniffy blonde Lady Worthing, "we were discussing which of the men we would have our fun with if we weren't with our husbands." "The local men, of course," said Mrs. Chandler, the prettiest and most soft-spoken of the group. The three of them burst into a peal of giggles. "How fun," Cecily said dryly. The three women began their judgments. "Mr. Lingham? Much too short and too dark," said Lady Worthing with a curled lip. "Mr. Chong? The shop owner? Absolutely not. You can smell the shop on him. Do you want musty anchovies on your bed sheets?" "Mr. Rahman, the assistant headmaster?" "Oh, yes," said Mrs. Chandler, closing her eyes. "The perfect tan on his skin," said Lady Lewisham. "I don't see what you see," said Lady Worthing, pursing her lips. "He's almost too educated, too westernized. You know, it's like having a darker version of one of our own." Cecily choked. This was not the afternoon she'd had in mind. She'd heard about British men who lusted over the local girls, called them exotic natives, brown skin tarts. British literature was certainly full of the rabid sexualization of non-white races. But in her mind, British women were filled with only two expressions, disgust and paranoia. And while these bothered her, she had adjusted to the disapproving curl in their lips and their arched raised eyebrows when they were forced into any kind of encounter with someone darker than themselves. She had not been prepared for whatever this was. The women continued. "Gordon Alcantara," and Cecily's husband. "Two." Lady Lewisham turned to Cecily as though suddenly remembering her presence. "Mrs. Alcantara, I hope you won't mind us. He's just too small and shouty. Can you see?" Cecily stared at a particularly shimmery corner of the tiled floor. They were crude, but not wrong. "Now you're Mr. Chun." Lady Lewisham gasped into her gin and tonic with the fullness of happy intoxication. That's Lena's husband. Cecily raised her eyes from the floor and watched Lena carefully. On the surface, Lena seemed fine, nodded and smiled keenly as though the women were discussing something banal, like flower arrangements or the price of produce. But on her lap, Lena's fingers were twisted together, knuckles white. "Let's not be rude to our hostess, shall we?" Cecily said. "Bingley Chun, he's a short one, isn't he? Such a little man," said Lady Worthing, leaning back in her chair and settling in as though for a long discussion. "Oh, but that voice, oh la la. Sounds like they spat him out from boarding school. If you didn't look at him, you'd think it was a Harrow boy speaking." Lady Lewisham sighed. "Such a pity about everything else when he could be one of us. But I suppose you can't have everything." "Now, Mrs. Chun, you must let me make amends in advance, but I would absolutely have him. He's such an animal, isn't he, Mrs. Chun? Honestly, sometimes I wonder he didn't end up with a white missus." Mrs. Chandler fussed with an imaginary out-of-place curl and looked over at Lena. I think I'll stop there.
Thank you for that taste. And so I just want to start by asking you, tell us about the book just generally. So many of us have been introduced to it probably through the flap copy or by seeing it out and about in many illustrious publications. But in like 30 seconds, what is this book?
30 seconds. I come here and I have an interview question. So The Storm We Made, my first novel, is about the unlikeliest of spies, a woman named Cecily Alcantara who is a discontent, kind of bored, irritated housewife in 1930s British Malaya who's on a quest for some kind of fulfillment. And in her quest for fulfillment and self-actualization becomes enamored by a Japanese general and becomes a spy who ushers in the most violent occupation in the Second World War to Malaya. And the novel also follows her 3 children aged between, I should know this, 7 and 17 who have to live with the consequences of their mother's actions as a spy, but they don't know her secret.
So one of the things that really struck me about this is, of course, as I said, I'd read the flap copy. I had an idea of what I was in for. And in the early pages of the book, we're being introduced to characters. We're kind of getting a sense of this historical place and time. And then page 17, bam, Cecily stepped back and turned to face him. And the him is Fuijwara. This was unusual. The nature of their relationship was transactional. Fuijwara was her spy master. She, the informant, gathered intelligence, mostly stolen bits of information from her husband, Gordon, whether from the discarded bits of paper in his trash or from conversations she overheard. So within pages, we are thrust into this really exciting and very dynamic situation that we're going to find out is really the inciting incident in the whole book. Can you talk a little bit about pacing and about like your sense of how you wanted to unfold this story, how you wanted this to be experienced by the reader?
So I think the thing to know is, so this novel has 4 points of view. The mother and her 3 children, and anybody who's a writer in the audience knows that like now it's very trendy to do like multi-point of view novels. I see some writers smiling, but when I first started to write this novel, actually, even though it's, you're hearing the flap copy, it's like it's all about a spy and this like, woman empowerment or whatever. But when I first started writing this novel, it was about 3 really sad children living through the end of the Second World War, and those were the 3 point of views, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like, there's a space and time for sad children living through the war because war is sad and children live through it. However, while I was writing this novel, I started writing it at the end of 2019. It bled into early 2020, and all of us who are here remember, like, that was probably the shittiest time in most of our lives. I was in New York City, and I was writing this novel, and we were in this like lockdown situation. And then my mom died, as I mentioned, my uncle died. Now here I was writing this novel about home, and I was unable to go home. I was unable to see anyone. And so I just decided, I need to give myself something. I need to give myself a completely unhinged narrator who gets to run around, be really chaotic, made some bad decisions, and have the agency that I didn't feel like I had at the time in my 600 square foot apartment, walking around in my bathrobe. So I did. So I created this like mom who just makes really bad decisions, and she just runs around, and I made her a spy because I was like, why not? I really like spy TV. I really like I know that I would make a really bad spy, but always wanted to be one. I have like no poker face, but and so I was like, it's an experiment. It's a multi-point of view novel. Again, if you're a novelist, you know that you can just like take one out and be like, we're done. But then she stayed in there because that's what happens with novels. And Cecily became the emotional core of the novel. And because I think she was a spy, it became a really pacey novel. It moved from being sort of like a sad, important war novel to like chasing this woman around who is like a plot in herself. And that's kind of what happened.
And I was going to ask about structuring too, because of course we do. That's so interesting that you started the draft without Cecily in it, because I think we, the reader, align ourselves with her really early on. She's the first point of view character that we get. And then much of the narrative alternates. We are in one time and then in another time learning about the background and what Cecily's been through. So can you talk about that? Was that a lot of fun to go back and forth? How did you actually do that? Did you do most of the timeline drafting in one session? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So the thing to know about this novel is it's 4 point of views and also takes place across 2 timelines. So 3 of the characters exist at the end of the Second World War, kind of like 1945, like August through December. And then one character, the mom, takes place across 10 years from 35 to 45. If you're a writer, I do not recommend it. And it's needlessly complicated. It was really annoying. It required me to like walk around muttering to myself at home in my, again, 600 square foot apartment, not much space to walk around. Really unhinged. I don't recommend. However, when I first started writing this novel, it was 3 points of views. Then it became 4. And then I was kind of working with a thesis advisor over at the new school where I did my MFA, and I did not finish, but I dropped out, but we can discuss that later. And, she and I were talking, and I was like, oh my God, it's so hard. I started this novel with 3 kids, and now I have their mom. And in order to think about the cause and effect of her actions, I have to write a lot of flashbacks. Sorry for the non-writers in the audience, but like, we're now doing like craft and theory. And she was like, okay, so why don't you just write her in the present? And I was like, no, because the rule says when you write multiple point of views, they all need to be in the same timeline. And she was like, literally, who said? And I'm like, well, the rules of writing say that when you write multiple point of views, in order to reduce complexity, they need to be in the same timeline. And she was like, literally, who said? And I was like, oh my God. I guess I said, and since I am the architect of this world, I guess we can change it. And so that's what happened. I had a thesis advisor who was like, literally, who said, and challenged me to undo the rules that I set for myself, because I'm a very rigid, rule-oriented person. If there are no rules, I will write my own because I like parameters. And she was like, well, now you're a writer, so you don't need all these rules. So sorry. You don't need all these rules. And then it became 4 point of views with 2 timelines, which, again, I do not recommend. I think it works for this novel, but don't do it.
Yeah, and I mean, the big secret is that rules do not exist, right? I mean, they aren't rules. It's just if it works, it works, I think, which...
I like a rule, though.
You like rules? Okay, well, they're well broken here. And one of the really interesting things, and one of the things that really carries the reader experience, is that the experience of war is it's horrifying and it's brutal and it's visceral. And then we get these moments of gentility that sort of break through, because we've got Cecily and her timeline trying to be a part of this British occupied society, trying to find her place in it and to find her place in the hierarchy. And so that kind of brings me to some of the themes in the novel that are really, I think, well developed and so interesting here. So we have a lot of different depictions of prejudice, social hierarchy, classism, racism, and they are approached from so many nuanced ways, because the society that's depicted in the novel has so many different overlapping hierarchies going on. So one of the things that we first learn about Cecily is that her family was Eurasian, descended from the Portuguese, and that her mother, and this is a quote from the novel, relished the speckle of white in their names and their blood, would sweep her eyes dark with judgment over others around them. And so we understand that Cecily comes from this place in which, white supremacy is very much upheld and revered, and she is understood to be being judged against different levels of whiteness around her. But then we learn also later that Cecily herself in adulthood has these judgments of British society and these judgments of the British women, as we heard in the reading that you just did. And then there's more that I can get into afterward. But can you talk a little bit about what it was like to write that very nuanced sort of sense of class and race, especially in that earlier timeline?
That actually no one ever have done ton of these events, and I've actually not got that one before, so thank you. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about it. I don't think it was difficult for me to write, simply because some of this that you're seeing mirrors some of the things that I've seen in my own family. I come from One side of my family is Chinese, hence the last name Chan. But the other side of the family is Eurasian, and Eurasian people in Malaysia has a different definition than here, where here it literally just means European and Asian. But Eurasian people in Malaysia and in Southeast Asia are often a separate sort of race of people who are descended from early colonizers, pre-British usually, the Portuguese or the Spanish, who intermarried or assaulted and resulted in a whole race of sort of Creole people that have their own culture, that have their own food, that have their own, often their own language. But now the language is primarily oral, so it's dying with the generation. And that's the kind of background that I grew up in. And in this community, a lot of people have European last names: Alcantara, Rosario, Fernandez. I was just talking to Bernard about this, who's Filipino. And people really do. I have family that they have this Facebook group, which is super unhinged Facebook group, which tends to happen with Facebook groups. And in it, they're all trying to trace their family trees to go as far back as they can to find like the whitest ancestor. That is crazy because we are Malaysian and a colonized people. And so, but yeah, that's kind of what they do. And so it was easy. It was an observation that I'd seen in the present that was easy for me to transmute to the past because nothing much has changed in that way. Not everyone is like this, obviously, which is the nuances that you see with the different people having different kinds of views in the novel. But it is common to kind of like grasp and clasp for like this like tiny bit of whiteness, sometimes imagined, that you can get from your lineage, which is literally the definition of white supremacy.
Oh yeah, and for sure, and I know that we see that in so many communities of color, especially, right? And I'm so sad because you're saying such wonderful things, and I have like 20 things I would love to hear you talk about for 5 minutes each. But I want to stay kind of with, we talked about Cecily and about her nuanced ways that she develops from her background. There are so many characters in this book who represent these really interesting inversions or sort of departures from what we would expect. So we have a Japanese character, Mr. Takahashi, who is... for one of the characters in the book, he is one of the only people that she meets who is Japanese and who is really kind to her. We have Gordon, who is the husband of our protagonist, and who, even though she understands, she responds to men as though they are in many ways an oppressive force and an oppressive population, he is really in some ways very weak, or he's very recessive, I think, in the household. And we have many other characters who represent sort of these surprises. Can you talk to us about building characters and about characters that you enjoyed most to build in this book?
So I think in the book, what you need to know is that, so there are 4 point of view characters, and then each of them, as Shannon alluded to, has a mirror. I like to think about this book as 4 love stories. 4 little small love stories. Each of them has, so Cecily has, her spy master who's like clearly villain, right? And then Jujube, the eldest daughter, has this older gentleman, Mr. Takahashi, who's like a really nice Japanese civilian who she has mixed feelings about, who's like genuinely nice to her, but she's like, well, F you are the colonizer, like you're ruining my family's life. And she does some things that may or may not be ill-conceived. The middle boy, Abel, is at a labor camp facing a lot of torture, and he has this friend there who tries to urge him to be a better version of himself. And then the youngest girl, Jasmin, has another little friend that she meets who's like this mystery girl that she meets, and they play together, and you'll see how it all comes together. Each of them has a mirror, and most of their mirrors, actually no, 1, 2, 3 of the 4 mirrors are Japanese. So if you talk about the history of occupation in the Pacific Theater, which again people don't really talk about, so I'm here to teach. Obviously the villain is like Imperial Japan. Japan was a colonizing force. They were really cruel. They killed more people in 4 years than the British did in 50, etc., etc., etc. But when in conversations with my grandma, who inspired a lot of this book, she was always very careful to delineate between the Japanese imperial soldiers, who were without a doubt very, very cruel, and just Japanese people, Japanese civilians with whom she had different friendships with, who just were there to live their lives. And it was important for her to separate these for me. And so I think in the book, that is kind of what I'm trying to show, that our protagonists, the four protagonists, are all very nuanced, ambiguous people who are, I think, none of them have sort of purity, full purity. You never really know if they're like good or bad, except maybe the child. And they have these mirrors in their Japanese counterparts who are in some ways also very nuanced, even if they're villainous. And in the cases where they're not villainous, often kind of good, pure mirrors of our characters. And so it's just important for me, I think, as a writer. Okay, so I said this once at an event in the UK and I got booed. So we'll see if I will get booed here. But I said, I don't think that pure good people make good characters. Like, I don't like a fully pure hero. I think ambiguity makes for a better character. And I got booed.
Who booed that? That's... How could
300 people. 300 people in this like random tent in like Hay-on-Wye, which is a very small town in the UK, booed me. It went great after that, but they did boo me.
Oh, that is so interesting, because that's one of the recurring themes throughout the novel, is that every person is capable of both good and bad, which I think is, I don't see how one could argue with that. So if your character is going to be authentic, they have to reflect that, I think. So, and again, I have 20,000 things I would love to hear you talk about here, but I'm going to ask about one that was really interesting to me here, which is the depiction of a friendship between women. And so this is done really well in this novel. It reminded me of Toni Morrison's Sula in some ways, where we've got at the center of the book a friendship between women that is really in many ways torn asunder by forces outside them. But so we hear that Cecily has befriended a woman, and they spend so much time together. They have so much bodily closeness, and they really develop this friendship that is very fortifying for her in an important way, I think. Tell us about building that friendship, drawing it out, and about real life experiences, if you have them, that you modeled them on. I know I happen to know that Vanessa is a wonderful, wonderful friend, because I follow her pretty religiously on social media, and I know she is loved by many.
Okay, so yeah, this actually brings us to how Shannon and I met. Shannon, I don't know if Shannon remembers this, but Shannon thinks we met on social media, but I met Shannon when I was, okay, it makes no sense because there's some of you here who remember me from my previous work where I was like a communications director at Facebook. But I was an intern at a literary magazine after that, which again doesn't make any logical sense, but like I was trying to make inroads in the publishing world or whatever. And I was an intern at this literary magazine called One Story, which is a wonderful magazine. It publishes literally one story a month. It goes out to subscribers. Very old school, very wonderful. And Shannon's story was handed to me to proofread, which was such a mistake because anybody who knows me knows that I love to read and like I'm the worst proofreader in the world. Like I just like my final copies, I'm pretty sure they have typos. So bonus for you if you find them. Like I just can't proofread. But that was my task. I was an intern. I was like, okay. It's like a 35-year-old intern, you guys. I was like, I'm going to proofread. And I was like, I fell in love with the story. And I was like, I must know who this person is. And I just like found you, I think, online. I was like, hi, Shannon, I really love your story. And you were like, okay. Anyway, so that's how we met. And then, Twitter was like in its like fun stage back then. And so we started to talk, I think, and became sort of like online friends when we met for the first time in person today. I know. The internet is a wonderful place, y'all. I forgot the question.
Tell us about writing
friendship.
Woman friendships, yes.
So the book, I said is 4 different love stories and also features a lot of different friendships. And I think the friendship that Shannon is talking about is the one between the main character, Cecily, and her friend, Lena, who you heard me allude to earlier. And without giving too much away, Lena's husband is Cecily's spy master, and Lena doesn't know this. There, I gave it away. Yeah. Now you got a spoiler.
Spoiler alert.
But they become friends despite the secrets and despite the lies and despite the obfuscation. And, I'm a great believer in friendship between women. I think friendship between women can come really quickly, become very close. And like women can become friends like in a bathroom. Like after this, like a bunch of women are going to like go to the bathroom to fix their face and gonna be like, girl, you look so great. Like go to a bar, like after hours, like go to the women's bathroom. There's a bunch of random strange women who are strangers to each other, like fixing each other's hair and like hyping each other up and being like, he don't deserve you, girl. Like, women just become friends really quickly and build these strong communities. And I'm one of those women who will be like, he don't deserve you, girl, in the bathroom. I'd be like yelling and then go home with like 5 best friends and don't remember anyone's name. And so I wanted, I think, to reflect the friendship between women in my book, since it's a very sort of crucial part of my life. I moved to the US at 19 years old with no family. I still have no family in the US. I'm very close to my family. And as a result of that, had to build familial connections in this country that I didn't know anyone. And so I built, I think, communities and friends on both the East Coast and the West Coast. And a lot of them have stayed my friends for many, many years. And I just wanted to reflect that. I like having friends.
That is lovely. So, and I have so many process questions I would love to ask you that would be probably most interesting to the other writers, but I know we only have a few minutes before we're going to take audience questions. So I will ask about, and when the book was introduced, or rather when you were introduced tonight, I think Bernard said that this is a book about how war is experienced in the body. And that really stuck out to me, that line, because there are so many very physical and very physically felt details throughout this book. And so I don't mean that to lead you to an answer here, but I wanted to know which portions of the book were the easiest for you to write, they just slipped out, and which were the hardest to write, in whatever way you want to take that.
And before I answer that, I guess there'll be audience questions in a bit. And there's always like this like really awkward gap between like when they're like audience questions and everyone just like stares really awkwardly and I'm like, help. So like think of some questions, please. So when they're like cue you to ask questions, like just ask questions so I don't have to be like, no questions. Okay. Now that we've got the logistics out of the way.
And if we have silences, I have more questions. Don't worry.
So the easiest part, okay, so the hardest part of the book to write, honestly, was this main character, Cecily, because she's a mother and a spy. I am neither a mother nor a spy. So that was interesting, but it just required me, I think, to just imagine more, which is what writers do. But I had to sort of flex that muscle, and it was actually it ended up being really rewarding and really fun. But it was really frustrating because I'm like someone who likes to do things that I know how to do. Kind of a rigid person. I just like to do what I do best. And I was like, why am I choosing to do this thing that I don't know how to do? And I don't know how to write about these experiences that I don't know. But as she turned out to be the main character, I guess it was worthwhile of an experiment, but it was tough. What was easiest to write? Writing novels is really hard, so I don't know if there's an easy part. I think that, so there's a teenage girl in the novel. She's 17 years old. She was probably easier to write, not the easiest part, but easier to write because I remember what it was like to be like a beleaguered eldest daughter, teenage girl who's just like pissed at everything and like feels like everyone is disappointing and she has to carry the weight of like the whole family on her shoulders, except that she's in a war and I was like brought up middle class. But I was like, everyone is disappointing to me. I have to care for this idiot brother who doesn't know anything. Who still doesn't know anything. And so it was easy for me to internalize her anxieties and just general irritations.
Okay, that's a really great answer. And may I say, I have 3 little kids, and the ennui of motherhood, you nailed it. Okay. And I think this is a good time to kick it over to audience questions.
Ooh, the hat fell off.
So, and I believe that, yeah, you were asked to come to the microphone up here behind the pillar that you might not be able to see.
Hi, no pauses.
Yay!
So I was wondering about Fuijwara. One, I was kind of wondering, like, is he based off of like the Fujiwara clan in Japan or like a specific Japanese general? And since we just found out that he is the villain, and I love a good villain, how villainous is he?
That is an excellent question, and your instinct was right. He is based on a Japanese general in real life called Tomoyuki Yamashita, who led the invasion of Malaya. He was a Japanese general and a brilliant military strategist, and the things that we do know about him in history are quite few. But the biggest is that he led the invasion of Malaya and won really quickly and beat the British Navy because the British were expected an invasion from Japan because, you know, that was the time the Second World War was about to happen. The Japanese invaded Malaya the day after they bombed Pearl Harbor. So just information for people who like history. And the British were like, all right, we're ready. So they pointed their cannons like south to the sea. They were like, naval invasions coming. And the Japanese were like, mm-mm. They invaded north from Thailand on bicycles via land, while the British cannons were pointing in the opposite direction. There is a really iconic historical photograph of this general and his army invading. And the Japanese invaded on bicycles through the jungle wearing hot pants, which seems comedic, but is pretty great because they were appropriately dressed for the weather, unlike their woolen attired British counterparts who were facing the sea. And so it was a very easy invasion, and General Yamashita led this invasion. Whether he was a spy, I don't know, probably. Whether he cheated on his wife, I don't know, probably. But that's the role of the historical fiction novelist, right? We like get history, get some facts and color between the gaps, and then give you a villain.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hi, Liz.
How are you?
I'm good.
The last answer kind of teed this up nicely, but one of the things I really loved about the book was, as someone who loves history, just learning about this period, and you obviously have mastered it. So I was curious both on your process. Obviously, you brought a lot of your own, the stories of your family, but how you got up to speed and became so knowledgeable about this period. And then were there any surprises, things you didn't know before that really stuck out to you that are in the book or not?
Yes. The answer is yes to all of the above. So what you're asking basically is like the research process, right? And I always say this, but when I first started doing these events, I used to get really insecure when I get asked a research question because in my mind, like historical fiction people are like real.
It's not supposed to be a gotcha. I mostly want
No. I got answer though. I got answer. I'm impressed. Like, so the thing that y'all need to know is like Liz and I and a couple other people in this audience, we used to work on the same team as communications people at Facebook. So like we got answers, we got messages, like we know this stuff. Or media trained. But so research. Historical fiction people are like, I thought in my mind, like really method, right? They have like their reams of research, like massive bibliographies. They do like a lot of interviews. Like the novelist Min Jin Lee is famous for saying that she researched for like 10 years before she wrote her book Pachinko. And I'm like, not like that. And I used to feel really insecure because I was like, oh my God, like, am I disrespecting the form? Am I being like a lazy, am I being bad at my job? But then, I started writing this novel in the early part of the pandemic. Libraries were shut down, archives were shut down. All I had were like these stories that my grandma told me about surviving the war, some good, some bad. And I just started writing. And they kind of flowed out of me. And then I started to do sort of more research to fill in the dates of battles and some information about like the labor camp in the novel. And then I realized as I started to do more research, there actually isn't that much out there. So if when I was writing about the labor camp, there's a lot of stuff out there because the labor camp housed a lot of European POWs. But if you wanted to know about day-to-day lives of like Southeast Asian, Malaysian people at that time, we got nothing. okay? Because historians do not write about us. And so I had to come to terms and therapize myself and realize that, like, if there is nothing out there, maybe the stories are its research. The stories and the memories, you lay them out on paper and then they become research and history. But it was a process for me to kind of think through, because I didn't I didn't know, I didn't have a model for other people doing this, basically, because people don't really write about our region.
Good answer.
Thanks.
So now this is the model, by the way.
Yeah, I love that answer. I was actually going to ask, at what point do you just put the research aside and let the story, just sort of like be, like shine through. But I want to know, I was reading a little bit about the acknowledgments, because I can already tell I'm going to love this book and I'm so excited to read it. But I saw you talked about having messy pages. So I really want to know, before it became like this really beautiful book, what was that? I would just love to know, like, what that looked like what, I guess just what your writing process is. Like, did you have just really like a bad draft, and just like at what point do you just like persist with it?
Thanks for that. Yes, I did have a bad draft, and I also have like a bad look. So, you see in movies, like all these writers, like really systematic. They like write in cafes. They have like their hair in a high ponytail, and they're like dressed really well. They're sipping coffee. They have like, I don't know, like a perfect setup. I'm like not like this. I have this like standard blue Target bathrobe that I write in that has like a burnt sleeve, because I tried to cook in it once and then it singed the bottom, because like I just look like a troll. And that is how I write best, like preferably like unshowered. I'm like unhinged when I write, and so my drafts are kind of unhinged too. And so, I started out trying to write chronologically, like in a really, again, I like rules. I'm kind of rigid. So I was like, all right, I'm going to write forward. I'm going to correct as I go. I'm going to edit. It's going to be a beautiful draft. And then about halfway through, I just kept going back and starting over, and it wasn't working. And so I just started to write forward in a really unhinged way. So I would write in first person if I felt like it. I would write in third person if I felt like it. I would like draw and sketch if I felt like it. And so my first draft was literally like all forms. It was multiple point of views, multiple tenses, no grammar. Like sometimes I'd have a drawing, sometimes I'd have like sort this out all in caps and there's nothing there. And then I just went back and made a list and fixed it. So, I don't think there's any one way to write, but messy first drafts are the best. I think messy people make messy first drafts, and messy people make great writers. So
Awesome. I feel so much better. Thanks.
I'm glad.
Hi, V. So I will preface this by saying I'm not a writer, but the book is about war, as you've talked about, and you kind of have like these four, like your four babies that you wrote and brought into the world, and then you wrote these terrible things that have happened to them. And I was just curious what that was like for you, if it's difficult to have these children that you created and have to write these real but awful things that occur.
That is a great question, and the answer is yes. I never set out to write a historical fiction novel because I like to write contemporary autofiction, like shit about, millennial women like me. And then I started writing this novel kind of by accident as like an assignment in class that I thought was going to be thrown away at the end of the semester in this graduate program that I did drop out of. And then it became a thing. And I was like, oh my God, why am I choosing to depress myself with these like sad children living through a sad war in a sad time in my life? But, so woo-woo. But I feel like stories compel you, they call you, and this one called to me to write it, and so I did. But it was tough sometimes, not because actually writing the characters and their woes, but to understand that my family and people I know and people who could be like me had lived through these sorts of atrocities was quite challenging to think about, because it didn't require imagination as much as grappling with with history and just with like the idea that the 1940s was not that long ago. And people don't write about the Pacific Theater when millions of people were killed. And like, it was just tough. It was tough. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Vanessa?
You guys have been great.
I have more if we... Oh, you've got one.
Or you can say it, we'll repeat it.
Either.
Well, considering, you wanted to put in these stories, do you feel like that you, get any of your, so in Spanish, when you write, you don't have quotations, you tend to have, these, or you write a very different way. Do you feel like by you having 4 different characters, that was kind of bringing more of, your storytelling? Did you bring anything special to the storytelling that was different? That you were like, I want to, forget the rules and just do something my own way?
So I think the question is, was there something specific that I brought to the storytelling that sort of broke the rules, that maybe was very much my own? And you specifically asked about the 4 point of views, possibly as, being aware I broke the rules. I'd say the answer to that is yes, again, because it's not normal to write that many point of views, but I did because I come from a very large extended family where my dad has 40 first cousins and we're all very close, and everyone talks at the same time at the top of their lungs. We are a family who loves to perform our conversations. So we love to gossip. Everyone's just always yelling, and everyone's always crammed in these hot houses, just screaming. And I'm considered the quiet one of my family, if you believe it. I am the observer, which is crazy because can't stop talking, right? But so I'm used to processing information that comes at me all in broken narratives all at the same time, from this side, someone in the back whispering about somebody cheating on their husband, this side, and putting it all together and coming up with something. And so I think that's kind of ended up being the way that I wrote this novel. I could not have written it any other way, where basically there's 4 things going on, 4 stories. They're all disparate or seem to be disparate. They're in different places and they all sort of come together at the end. It's a reflection of the way I process information and my family converses. So I guess I don't know if that's an answer to your question, but I think that's sort of what I personally brought to it.
Vanessa, thank you so much for this. This has been so fascinating and so enriching, I think. And I'm just so glad we got to have this conversation.
Thank you, Shannon. Thank you for doing this with me. Thank you guys for being awesome. I hope that passed in a fun way. I hope it was worth your time. Thank you once again for braving the elements. Again, I think in DC, y'all consider this a warm night, but to me, it was really cold. And you could be at home with a book, your pets, your children. Maybe you don't want to be with your children, I don't know. But I'm glad that you're here. Thank you to Politics and Prose for having us. And I guess, be signing books after this. We'll talk through some logistics, but thank you so much.
Once again, we want to thank Vanessa and Shannon